Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be discussing the new album by the heavy metal rock band Evanescence titled The Bitter Truth. It is a long time coming for this project, as this is the band's first album of original new material in almost a decade. Technically, this could be considered their fifth studio album, although officially I would call it their fourth, as their last project in 2017 called Synthesis was a reimagining of all of their hit songs from their earlier catalog in a more orchestral but also electronic produced direction, with two new tracks as well to sort of tide us over. And it was an interesting project. I have reviewed it on this channel. I've reviewed all of their albums up to this point on this channel, actually, and I will link them if you're interested in watching in the description box below. And Evanescence is a band that I have always been following since I was a teenager. They are one of my, and if not the heavy metal rock bands of my teenage years. And pretty much the only rock band that I could say I was a real fan of. I was always a little bit more into pop stuff, so getting into that sort of genre of rock was not really my thing. I was very intrigued by the dark gothic atmosphere of the visuals and of the songs. Amy Lee's vocals was always the linchpin for me. I think it was for everyone. I think that, even Amy herself remarked at one point that, she understood that a lot of people viewed it as her and then a bunch of backup players. She's the only member of the band from the very beginning. For the last 20 years, there has been a ton of different people coming in and out of the band. And the band is officially at, I believe, 5 people. And there actually is a woman involved for the first time on this new record, alongside Amy, which I think is great. But Amy was always the soul of the record, of the band for me. It always felt a little bit more like an Amy Lee record than it did anything else. But, at the same time, I appreciate all the members for what they brought to the table. I think it's pretty clear if you've watched my past reviews that my favorite Evanescence album has been always The Open Door. It's the album that introduced me to Evanescence, and it is just that quintessential album of theirs. I think that, everyone looks to Fallen as being, the critically acclaimed, Grammy award-winning record. But personally, I think The Open Door is even more refined and even more cohesive. There's just a little bit more of a clearer direction for their sound. I just think it's really well written, composed. All of the songs just carry such weight and meaning and heaviness and lightness. It's like this perfect balance of darkness and escapist fantasy. I've always wished that they could deliver something on that level again, but I think with many artists, you have to accept that they're never going to retrod the same territory. They're going to evolve, they're going to change in their sound, and they might not necessarily live up to the work of their past. With The Bitter Truth, this album, that unfortunately is definitely something that's always going to be in the back of a lot of, I think, Evanescence listeners' heads. It's something that really can't be helped, unfortunately. We just have such a love and affinity, especially since it's been so long since we've gotten new music from them, that we just feel like the comparisons are so glaring. Their last album, which came out in October of 2011, so nearly 10 years, was self-titled, and it saw the band get a little bit less gothic and a little bit more classic rock in areas. There was just a little bit more of a feel of a band sound to a lot of the album songs, which is great. I think the live sound that some of the songs had, it did drown out Amy Lee's vocals. I'm not entirely sure about the mixing on some of those tracks. And unfortunately, we do find that the issues with the mixing and production on Evanescence are amplified even more so 10 years later on this new project, The Bitter Truth. And that's one of the biggest critiques I have for this project. And I've seen a lot of Evanescence people talk about that in reviews. The first song that we got as a real taste of this project was called Wasted on You, and it was released back in, I believe, May of 2020. It was actually filmed for the music video in everyone's homes, the band members' homes, and then they all sent the footage together remotely, because of course at that point quarantine was, very, very much a thing. And so they decided to, the coronavirus pandemic definitely sidelined their plans on releasing this album when they were planning to. I do believe the album was actually intended to come out at the earliest last summer, if not by the fall, but the coronavirus pushed all of that back. And so the single Wasted on You came out, and I was really excited. I was like, oh my God, here we go. I wasn't expecting them to come back, but here they were. Keep in mind, I also want to qualify that why have they been taking 10 years off? Amy Lee has been busy, okay? She's been doing other projects and things I haven't talked about on this channel. Amy Lee wrote a children's album, basically composed her own children's lullabies with her and the piano in 2016 called Dream Too Much, which was really cute. If I had had a kid at that age, I would have been all over it. She also helped in 2014 provide vocals and some composing credits for a film called Aftermath. And so she's been, dabbling here and there. She did a song for a film called Voice from the Stone in 2017. She provided the credits song, which is gorgeously haunting. And periodically has just dropped some, more solo feeling stuff here and there. So it's not like we haven't necessarily heard Amy material in 10 years. Plus, like I said, we had Synthesis. But like I said, as the entire band with that signature sound that we were a little more accustomed to, it had been 10 years. And so Wasted on You was our introduction to that. Do I think that that was a great first choice for a single? No, I do not think that Wasted on You was a smart choice as a lead single. But at the same time, it's perfectly fine that it was. I don't think Evanescence was in any way, shape, or form expecting to make any sort of chart impact, and they don't care, and that's fine. It is what it is. They're never going to be big like they were before. The pop landscape is just not really going to embrace alternative kind of stuff like that anymore. It's just it's in a very different sphere and realm of influence than it was when they debuted. But with all that being said, Wasted on You was not really a song. I mean, of course it got me excited about their return, but it didn't get me excited about the song at all. It felt a bit cookie cutter in terms of the melody, in terms of the lyrical content. I just wasn't entirely sure what to expect going forward. Then they dropped a song called The Game Is Over in, I think, July. A couple months later, they dropped another song. And this one wasn't promoted as a big single. This should have been the first single. I have no idea why they chose Wasted on You instead of The Game Is Over to give the music video treatment, to do the whole big, here we are back. It could have been that big comeback single for them. Keep in mind, whichever single they chose, they were not going to be charting and being huge on the hits and on Billboard. We knew that, unfortunately. But still, it just would have been a smarter move. Because The Game Is Over, although it took a bit of time to grow on me, is that song. It is the song that is jumping off of the page at you on this record. It's the real dynamic, brazen, unabashed power rock anthem on this record. I mean, there's a couple others that come close to it, but The Game Is Over just has that quintessential Evanescence power. And that's something that, we definitely get on this record. I mean, this is definitely a heavier record. It's not heavy in terms of the gothic stuff, which they were doing on their first two records, but we're getting, again, the really heavy guitars, a little bit more focus on the band sound of the project. Amy Lee's vocals are somewhat subdued a bit in part, and that's due to some shoddy mixing, in my opinion, because let's be real, Amy is sort of what sells the whole thing, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, the guitars are great. There's some great riffs, there's some great propulsive atmosphere, but there's really something about her voice that just counterwalls over it, that just sells the whole thing. It's the flagship, of the fleet. And there are so many songs where I just wish her vocal could have been turned up more. Just turn up the volume, like it was on the earlier records. And so we've gotten several singles since then, leading up to the album release today. And so here we are with The Bitter Truth. We have an album cover, which features, I believe, Amy and a little pill. Basically, take the happy pill, or the truth is really hard to swallow. That kind of imagery is evoked. I don't think it's by far anywhere near their strongest album cover. The Open Door, again, has that on lock. Their album covers are not that special, except for that one. Although their self-titled is by far the worst album cover. I mean, come on, that's just such a lazy album cover. I was so disappointed by it. I was already a bit disappointed that it was a self-titled, and then I was extra disappointed that they put no effort into that cover whatsoever. So this is at least giving us a concept. It's giving us something. And then we have 12 songs here. So let's go through the track listing. But before I do, again, I was doing some research on where Amy's headspace has been. Again, it's a lot of it coming from Amy, though the input for the songs comes from other members of the band as well. but she is one of the principal songwriters. The concept of the bitter truth, you know, there's a million things that you could think of when you evoke that kind of emotion. I mean, it's that kind of sentiment. And Amy talks about, you know, the bitter truth can mean from the ultimate, you know, difficult realities and hardships that we all have to face in life, facing of mortality. She unfortunately lost her brother, her younger brother. He's a lot younger than her, in 2018 to a battle with epilepsy, which is really tragic. Considering that Amy's no stranger to family tragedy, as she lost her sister when she was very, very young. She has several songs about her. Some of the best songs of her catalog, of the band's catalog, are about that, about her deceased sister. It was actually, I believe, her twin sister, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I read up on this, but I believe it was her twin sister. And so that is just something that's always weighed heavily over her. And now losing another brother, that's really, really sad. All before the age of 40. You know, like that's really, and there were some other band members' parents passing away. Just a lot of things already before the pandemic even came that had them in a state of like grief and processing that. And they were already kind of anticipating, we need to get back into the studio. Then the pandemic hit. And I do believe a lot of the songs were written largely before the pandemic. But I think the pandemic was what really sort of got them to get like a big, like, let's get together in the studio and just like really put these songs to tape and just send them to the label. Like, let's get this done. And it let that fire under them, as she said, to, well, now is the best time. Like, why wait any longer? We need to get this project out. The fans are clamoring for it. And since they weren't ever able to tour, they had a lot more time on their hands. So for the opening track on this record, which is actually 2 songs in one, though it's sort of shorter, it's more of a like prelude type track, we have Artifact and The Turn. Amy talks about the need for this album to basically start from a ground zero place, the darkest place after a tragedy. And so the spatial area we have around this song, which is sparse, electronic, and, you know, kind of on edge atmosphere, really lends to the feeling of crescendo to the guitars coming in, which leads into the first official song on the record, Broken Pieces Shine. And I think it's a great way to start the project, stripping it back. It's definitely one of the more electronic songs on the record, which harkens to a lot what they were experimenting with synthesis. And so it had me thinking as I was starting the project, keep in mind we'd heard a lot of the singles already, that I was like, yeah, we're definitely not ditching that direction, that sort of Portishead direction that they had sort of always been interested in playing with from doing the synthesis album. The first part of it, which was just a very simple verse, underneath golden skies, you will always be there. In the mirror, in my eyes, you will always be there, which is called Artifact, was just recorded Amy vocals on a microphone in a hotel room in 2019. Decided to keep it. It was like, hey, let's bookmark this. We're going to place this at the front end of the record. The second half, now I don't know if this is, it says it's a collaboration with the Crystal Method, which is a group created by Scott Kirkland. I don't know anything about them and their sound, so I don't necessarily know with the turn portion of it if he's the one behind the production. It sounds like that's probably the case. And so that's why it sounds so different from everything else on the record, because all of the other songs on the record are produced by a different guy. So it adds an interesting element of sonic atmosphere. Where do we go now that I have seen the turn? Where do we go now? Find a way to go back home to who we are. These lyrics are so encapsulating of Evanescence's thematic concepts. I mean, they have so many songs about a feeling of wanderlust and also a feeling of homesickness, a feeling of not knowing where to go after something tragic. It's exactly the sort of sentiment I expected to see littered all over this record. And sometimes the lyrical content, you know, I had this real gripe on their last album, Evanescence. The lyrical content can just be it's almost too what it is, you know? It's one thing to just write really powerful statements in a song, but sometimes it's too on the nose. And sometimes with the songwriting, that's a little bit of a gripe I have. So Nick Raskulinich is the one who produced the rest of this record, and he is the one we were all sort of looking at and going, your production, we're not too sure about it. It's so muddy. I've got to be honest, this might be one of my least favorite songs on the record, which I think is going to be a little bit controversial to a lot of fans, as I know that people are talking about the songs at the top of this record being far stronger than the ones towards the end. And I agree and disagree, because I do agree a lot of the great ones are at the beginning, but this song, to me, the melody just doesn't stand out. And I mean, I appreciate it sounds like an Evanescence song. It's a return to form kind of sound. But I feel like on the next track, The Game Is Over, I just feel like this song is just setting us up for that. That's the real, this is just the appetite cleanser. The Game Is Over is the full course meal. And so I don't sonically feel as attached to this song. Our flaws can be our superpowers, Amy says in talking about this track. All the little broken pieces of all of us come together and form the tapestry of greatness that we all can aspire to. So The Game Is Over, the flagship song, like I said, on this track, from that opening gong and the sort of rhythmic repetition of that drum line, you are getting a tour de force thrown at you with this track. And it's just something that like you want to buckle your seatbelt in for, it's that feeling of like taking off on a roller coaster. There's a real Rage Against the Machine sort of sentiment about, tearing off the blindfold, about mainstream society and the fakeness of Hollywood and the games of all of these, money-hungry people who are just coming to suck your soul. There's so much about, like rebelling against this outside oppressive force of reality that this song eschews. And talking about how there's such a dissonance in a lot of ways between the way we present ourselves and how we feel inside. I feel the world like a brick on my chest, and the party's just begun. Throw the rope, I'm wading through the mud. From your mouth flow 1,000 truths, but there's only one. Change me into something I believe in. Change me so I don't have to pretend. Sweet words, they mean nothing. They're not true, because the game is over. So the jig is up. We're only doing the authentic stuff now. I'm totally done playing your little game, playing charades. I'm going to be myself now, and you take it or leave it. And I need someone who's going to match that energy. So it's just as unapologetic as it gets. And it's one of the few songs that Nick's production I don't lament as much, because there's so much going on in the instrumental as well that I don't mind Amy's vocals being tuned down just a smidge. There are other tracks where it bothers me a lot more. Yeah, Right was another promotional single from this record. And I don't know how to feel about it. Interestingly, this was a song that was written over 10 years ago for the self-titled album before it ended up getting scrapped, as the label kind of wanted to change the direction of the project. There were a bunch of stuff that she'd had from those early days in 2010 writing the record. And so she knew that she needed to bookmark it, put it in that file for saving for later. And so she revamped it, changed the lyrics and the melody, and the song finally has a home on this new project, which I always find really interesting when artists go back to stuff they've written so long ago. Her and her friend Will Hunt, who is one of the songwriters she works with, wrote this song. And speaking about her past experiences being, a woman in a band and in the industry, yeah, I'm a rock star, I'm a queen resurrected, just as messed up as before. Twist the knife hard, just makes it easier to tell you I don't need you anymore. Life's a game till you lose, then what? I'm reaching a new level of not giving a fuck. Yeah, right, that sounds nice. Everything we ever wanted and more. Someday, I can't wait for the day, we'll get paid more than it was worth to sell our souls. The ultimate F you to capitalism, and the sort of illusion of fame that everyone chases a lot at the beginning of their career. And it's just this never-ending hamster wheel, and the disillusionment that she's experiencing from it. And I think that last lyric, more than it was worth to sell our souls, that what stands out for me on this track is that last outro verse line where she hovers close to the mic, and then we get very reverbed out, very atmospheric, and she just hisses that last note, souls, to us. It's like so dark, and it's so like what we would hear on The Open Door, that it gave me chills. And very little on this record gives me chills, and that's something on first listen, which is something I really lament about it. And if a lot of the songs, they feel so commercially wrapped up in a traditional rock sound that I don't feel a lot of original or sort of left field elements that are spooky or like really just gritty. And this is one of those moments where I feel like she's breaking that fourth wall, so to speak, and she's turning the song into something else. And I wish there was more of that on this record. It's the one selling point to the song. I'm so glad it's there, because otherwise it would be a not really that memorable type of track. I mean, the melody isn't that exciting. So when I saw the track title Feeding the Dark, I got real excited, as this is the type of track I would expect to hear and see a song title for from the band. And I'm pleasantly surprised that I think that if we're looking for the most gothic song on this record, and also somewhat a song that sounds maybe a little bit more like their earlier stuff, this is probably the track. Follow me under, low as we are, swallow your hunger, feeding this dark. Well, you know that you can't hide, and you know that you can't lie, because I know all your secrets and I won't let you forget. Seductively, like a dark enchantress, sort of playing devil's advocate for your, inner consciousness. Sometimes you just gotta succumb to those dark feelings and wallow in it. And I think that obviously this was written at a point where she was feeling just so low and frustrated and feeling as though, like, I just don't feel like standing up to it. I feel like succumbing, and I don't want to feel ashamed to do that. And that's the great moment when you realize you're a front woman for a band that's music is all about that. So you can write a really awesome, great, dark, gritty track for it. And I just think melodically, it reminds me so much of their earlier music. There are a few moments where I feel like they're treading the same melody lines as they have in other songs, either from their self-titled or even possibly before that. It's fine, they're going to copy themselves in a few places. I'm not going to have a gripe about it. So I've already talked about Wasted on You. It's just the lyrical trope about relating drugs and getting a fix to a relationship is a bit tired, though I don't, blame them for using it. And again, it wasn't planned to be the lead single. It was just the timing of the pandemic. They decided, maybe this song speaks a little bit better to what we're all going through. I think that they missed the mark on that judgment, though, because even if the lyrics might be a little bit more alluding to something that maybe would have been relatable, I think other songs would have still found a foothold and would have been sonically, I think, more important for them in terms of their comeback than focusing purely on what the lyrics might be saying, because this song doesn't have quite the same level of bombast. So, okay, Better Without You is probably the perfect example of Nick's production being really holding the band back, and particularly Amy back. Her vocals are entirely swallowed up by the sound of the band. There's so much instrumental. It sounds a lot like, as one reviewer said, she's in another room, muffled. You can't even really hear the drummer Will Hunt's drums as strongly as you'd like either. There's just so much of, a meshing of sound that it's oversaturating the sonic elements to a point where you're not getting a lot from anything. You're just getting a lot of everything. Now, it does have one of my favorite things that Amy does in a typical Evanescence chorus, where she takes a note and she does the vocal acrobatics with it. She takes the note up, down, over, and all through those valleys. And it's the selling point for me. And it's just on that I'm note. I'm. That's the best way to sell it, and make that a memorable chorus line. Because otherwise, to be honest, I'm not really feeling it. There's such a jaded energy of wanting to just expel the people who harmed you and held you back from the past. Amy talks about how, in the lyrics, she is hinting at experiences she's had in the industry, and that, believe it or not, it might sound bad in these lyrics, but it's even worse than you think. There's a lot that I think she wants to, even still continuing with further music, get off her chest about some of the troubles she's experienced, and the seeds of self-doubt that it has caused, in terms of telling you that you're not good enough. And I do like the lyric of our ashes twisting in the air. As empires fall to pieces, our ashes twisting in the air, it makes me smile to know that I'm better without you. So Use My Voice was the official second single on this record. And this was their first foray into a really overt political statement on a track. Amy has always been, I think, quite vocal, especially in recent years under the era of Donald Trump, speaking up for women, speaking up for, LGBT, speaking up for injustice, and making it very clear where her political loyalties lie. And I think the band as general is all in agreement there. And so what started this whole thing, though, for her was actually watching a trial for a rapist named Brock Turner at this university. I don't know if you all remember that, but it was this huge thing in 2016, 2015. I can't remember the year. And just the way he was let off from it and given just a slap on the wrist for doing something that, should have made him see serious time. But, he was a swimmer and that was going to tarnish his reputation as an athlete. And he was a white male, and like the woman's voice, it was just, oh, there was such a anti-women, energy coming from that entire trial and the mockery of justice that was put forth. And so that inspired Amy to eventually grow this song into Use My Voice, which, of course, over the years of Donald Trump just became more and more of a rallying cry. And you don't speak for me, don't you speak for me. Gather your friends and wave your gun in my face, but I will use my voice. Whether you like it or not, you're going to take what I got. Empowering the voice of the people, not just women, but everyone. If we can't talk about it, we'll just keep drowning in it. Yeah, I expect this sort of muster the troops energy, and I appreciate it. I think the guitar breakdown we get towards the end is one of the highlight parts, as Tim McCord and Troy McLaughlin just really let go. And in some ways, I almost wish we got more of that in some of these tracks, because as much as Amy is the one who's really riding the wave here, the guitars provide such a amped up energy. And so I appreciate the song. It's not my favorite, though. It's almost a little too commercial sounding for me. I get the sentiment for it, and I totally am here for it. I just don't come back to it as like a song that I feel personally that moved by, beyond just the fact that of course, that's an important message. Take Cover. Take Cover might have one of the most interesting melody lines for me. I am really growing to love this song. As a matter of fact, it's actually starting to be one of my favorites, which is interesting because a song like this off of something like The Open Door wouldn't have normally stood out to me as much. I think that maybe it's just because this album doesn't have as many other songs that I really liked off of albums like that, that the only sort of song that's reminding me of The Open Door a little bit, that I am really appreciating, is a, sort of like a low point for that album, but it's a high point for this album, if that makes any sense. And apparently this was another early 2010 track that the label decided to scrap. And interestingly, I mean, I guess I could hear that it's got a little bit more of a sound closer to where they were back then. Retribution. Yeah, a woman scorned, nothing is more, cause greater harm, and you better watch out because a storm is a-coming. I love how Amy says, people asked her, do you think people who probably are, listening to your songs thinking, oh God, am I someone that might have harmed Amy 10, 15 years ago? And, thinking, do you think anyone is going to pick up on that from your lyrics? And Amy's like, well, probably. If you think it's about you, you're probably right. That kind of attitude. And I think that's pretty funny. There's just some really, like I said, the way that Amy will pick one part of the chorus and just really let that part be that driving force for the melody, I just think really sells the entire energy of the track. And it's a great sort of punkier, gritty, heavy rock song. Again, not a style of music that I would normally be for, but the way it lets her vocals rise from her head voice to, from her chest voice to her head voice, and she just plays with her voice in that very punk aesthetic. It's something I love to see, and I'd love to see more on other songs. So Far From Heaven is the ballad of the album. I was always kind of most looking forward to what the big ballad is of any record, because looking at all of Evanescence's projects, the ballads are the ones that instantly grab me by the heart and just, they don't let me go. From Lithium to My Immortal to Lost in Paradise, those songs are my favorites of the band, and they're the songs that are mostly just Amy. They might have the guitars coming in eventually, but it's mostly her at the piano, and they just are that quintessential melancholic gothic anthem, and usually have such exquisite compositions. Unfortunately, Far From Heaven starts promisingly enough, but it falls flat for what those other songs were. It is no Lost in Paradise, it is no My Immortal. And it's really unfortunate because this album really needed one of those songs for me. The rockier moments are not too bad for me, but the moments where she would have tried to go in the vein that always drew me to Evanescence to begin with, the operatic, sparse, orchestral piano ballad songs, those are the songs that are really letting me down on this project. And Far From Heaven, like I said, builds with a promising piano line, but then the vocals, the notes that she uses don't really, unfortunately, I don't know if maybe it's because they've just done such great songs before, but it sounds like Lost in Paradise in parts. And then you get a little confused because your brain thinks, oh, we're following that melody line. And then it switches it a little bit. It's like tweaking the notes, taking one note and putting it up here instead of down there. And then you're like, wait a minute, that sounds so weird. Your brain's not accustomed to it. And maybe it'll grow on me, but there's too much compositional similarity to me to Lost in Paradise in particular. The former being such a stronger song that Far From Heaven is just it's trying to like look up to it and be like, hey, I can be just as beautiful as you. And then it's kind of just copying parts of it and then trying its own thing, but it would be better if it didn't have such a similar undergrowth to it, if that makes any sense. I mean, I apologize if that doesn't, it's hard to describe, but I'm also just not entirely sold on the production and the atmosphere that's evoked. I feel as though if there was less of the horns and sort of vague orchestral elements swelling around her voice, that I get it creates a space around it, but if it was more just at the piano, if there was more just clear guitars and then piano, and then the orchestra could come in, but in a much clearer way, I feel as though it would help the murkiness of the notes, which are hanging in the air that don't really, in parts, really sit well with the notes that she proceeds to go to. If you know what I mean, it creates some harmonic dissonance in parts of the song, and it kind of, I don't know. Lyrically, I automatically felt an affinity for the song. What if I can't see your light anymore because I've spent too long in the dark, and I'm on my knees without shame, begging to believe, but I feel so far from heaven. This is a concept about, you know, feeling lost in your faith after going through such a rough patch, where the sun didn't really shine, and feeling as though you're never going to get back to a level of faith that you once had in something. It doesn't necessarily have to be a religious sentiment, but it could be just a state of mind. It's a song that, you know, you can tell Amy was coming from a really dark place from. She speaks about depression, and how she just feels so differently about things. You know, things that she once believed so strongly were just crumbling before her, and, you know, questioning about what is love, what is the point of life and time. I mean, it touches on all of this. All my life, didn't want to dream I could lose you, but you just smiled. And so for her, it was just therapeutic, get this song out there, make it that, you know, rock bottom, like bittersweet, melancholic ballad, and move on. And so I think that the song, the bones of it, is really interesting. I would love to see in the, you know, adding of all the instrumental elements, and maybe in the melody construction, maybe some tweaking, because I think it could have grown into something even more, something of greater magnitude emotionally in terms of the sonic pull of the song. The magnetism is just not as strong as some of their previous ballads. Part of me definitely sounds like a lot like something off of their self-titled. The syncopation is a little weird. It's not, you know, it's more shouting at the microphone than it is trying to follow a melody line, which creates a great atmosphere of angst, but it's not something that I really find much of an affinity towards. It's not the kind of music from them that I gravitate towards. This is a battle cry to stay up, you know, when you're feeling down. I will be more than my survival, own these scars on my heart. Even in dreams, I hear you calling, breaking the surface. I won't let go, you're a part of me. Just choosing every day to be a warrior, you know, in the face of adversity. So it's a great sort of like towards the end of a show, like to pick the energy back up and give you that after Far From Heaven feeling of like, you got this, totally get it. The melody just doesn't have that much staying power. It's not really about the melody in that case. Blind Belief, the closing track. This is an interesting song. I think it's the song that I'm having such a growth spurt with in terms of appreciation. The first time I heard it, really didn't feel much for it at all. I was sort of like, oh, okay. Evanescence has often ended their albums on some pretty high notes, and this felt like a abrupt ending. Like it didn't feel like an album closer. But the more I've listened to it, the more it's just, you know, it's sort of interesting. I don't want to compare it to Of Monsters and Men, but on the latest Of Monsters and Men record, there's a song called Soothsayer, which is the closing track of that album. And I had a similar feeling at first where I was like, this is great, this is propulsive and it's energetic, but I don't feel it as like an album closer in the same way other albums have been. There's not the same level of catharsis initially. This song reminds me of Soothsayer for some reason, maybe even thematically it does as well, in that it's grown on me over time to be so brilliant in its construction, and it does have a resolution to it that is becoming more and more apparent to me, just not even in the lyrics, but in the sonic elements. And I think the key part for me is that key change that she has with "We hold the key to redemption." You notice the key changes as she's going through that line, and that flips that's a like a legit obvious flip and turn that I think signifies so well a sort of switch of mindset that I think is a great way to wrap up a record, because when you're trying to pump people up, you're trying to sort of change their state of mind. And it's one thing to get them in from a lethargic state to like an amped up state, but if you also sort of do the major to minor or minor to major shifts, or do these interesting note changes in the chorus, I think it actually adds a lot to, oh wow, that's something that's perking me up. Like, okay, we're in a change. We're really going to face the change. That's the energy that I'm getting from it. Blind belief. Are you afraid to see that our fathers were wrong? We hold the key to redemption. Let icons fall. It's a call to optimistic thinking, you know? I mean, and Amy says it's an important thing she placed at the end of the record to sort of say, as bleak as things may appear, and as hard as it might seem now to believe, there is a resolution to this. There is something positive that we can strive for, that as humans and as Americans, that there's a good in us, there's a collective that we can tap into, and that love overall, as she wanted that theme, that message to sort of be broadcasted like through loudspeakers at the end, is a sentiment that we need to take with us as we, you know, carry that torch forward into the night. And I think it's a great way to, yeah, like muster that courage that you need to face all of the hard things you've been wallowing in the course of the record. So I get the placement of it, and I love those notes on that line, "We hold the key to redemption." And I do also love the piano. I got really excited, piano chords, because the cascading piano chords are something that usually are a backbone to a lot of the pounding guitars. And they do get swallowed up pretty quickly on this track. I would have loved if they had a little bit more staying presence. But at the same time, it's a nice nod to music they made in the past, and it adds a little bit of an extra flavor and a gothic tinge, because it's probably one of the more gothic elements, the way they did those piano cascades in their earlier songs. So all in all, you know, like I said, it's a record that over time, there are going to be songs that rise and fall for me. Like I said, it's a shorter record considering some of their more recent work, and it's not really a record that I feel has that initial Evanescence grit and, more importantly, that gothic spirit. That's not to say, though, that it doesn't feel like an Evanescence record. It definitely feels like one. It's kind of what I expected it to sound like 10 years later. I am impressed that they still hold on to so much of that core rock sound. And maybe I expected them to change gears even more so, and I wasn't sure if I was going to like it. But like I said, I think the biggest glaring moment for me is the fact that the ballad just does not reach the heights that I wish it would. And that really upsets me. But again, it's a taste thing. Some people might not mind the melody or the allusions to the melodic structure of Lost in Paradise. They might find it just as beautiful as that song, if not more so. It's about what you find and gravitate towards sonically with things. And personally, grandiose Gothic melodies, I hold such high standards for that I am very, harsh about it and nitpicky. So in some areas, I'm going to nitpick, but it's an album that I'm so glad we have. It's not necessarily a revolutionary album. It's not necessarily an album that's going to sell people on Evanescence today. It's largely for the fans of the music of the past. I do think it'll please them, though. I don't think it's something that they're going to listen to and be like, this band changed. I don't like their music. They went pop. They don't represent me anymore. I only listen to their old stuff. Oh yeah, I agree. Their old stuff, you can't top it. I mean, I wish they would, but I don't think they can. But that being said, this doesn't feel like a selling out record for the most part, at least to me. The spirit and soul of Evanescence is always going to be evolving and changing, and I feel it very strongly on this project. And I'm just happy to have a new record from them. I mean, it's just really nice to see an artist come back after so long. Sometimes a band does come back, because I'll be honest, there was a moment there for a while I didn't think Evanescence was ever coming back. I think a lot of people agree that they felt like the band may have thrown in the towel. But I definitely think they've got more in them, and they will continue. I don't think it'll be another 10 years before we hear another project from them. Maybe only 5 or something. Like, it's going to be a while. They've always had gaps between their records, but maybe get a different producer. Maybe get a different producer. That's all I will say there. What do you think of The Bitter Truth? Are you enjoying swallowing this pill? Do you want to spit it out? And if you listen to Evanescence, what in the past, what are your thoughts on it, comparing it to the older records? And I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments below. Like I said, other reviews be linked in the description. And I will see you all with my next video. Hope you all have a wonderful, blessed day. Peace, love, and light. Bye.